clarity to whether there was a section here that was going to really address this. And if this committee doesn't feel that they are appropriate for this issue, maybe I should go back to the council and really ask for a climate action plan, which I believe the governor has requested, even though it is not something that you absolutely have to do. I think that since we have an urgency to become zero carbon emissions by 2030, we need to be on this. And I just feel like you can't ignore it anymore. And 73% of Orange County residents, there was a survey, have said they do believe in the climate crisis. So I think we got to take our heads out of the sand and really start planning, start supporting our residents and putting in solar and battery and doing what we can, you know, for our communities so we're not underwater in 30 years. And so that, you know, for our nation, for our city, our state, for our people.
Thank you for your comment, and I will ask for clarification from our director, Mr. Campbell, of that element.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We definitely appreciate those comments. I do think that that's a topic that potentially this committee might want to make a recommendation forward to either incorporate policies in the general plan. Now, hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, but I think on our agenda we'll be discussing the possibility of a sustainability and adaptation plan. And we're going to have a discussion about that this evening. So I think what you've kind of indicated today is aligned with that. It may not be exactly what the committee is thinking about, but I think this is the forum within which we discuss those topics. And if there is a recommendation for the body at a future date, then that could be taken up to the steering committee, and then we can ask the council, once we understand what all that might entail, for some direction and guidance as to whether it's something that the city council wants us to work on. So I think this is the right place for those ideas. So stay tuned. I think we have a little bit of that discussion later this evening.
Thank you. Yes. Mr. Baker?
Yeah, Dennis Baker. I don't think this falls under any agenda item. I personally would like to have a printed copy of the existing general plan. I've read it. I read it actually a while back, and then I've started to go through it. I'm kind of an old school paper guy, and not necessarily all this paper, but I'd like to have something I can mark up on. My concern is that if I just print what's like on the website, that's not up to date. There's been discussion before. Mr. Mosier's brought it up. What I would like is a comprehensive, what is the actual complete general plan now in a printed form that I can bleed on?
Okay. And I assume, Mr. Campbell, that you can take care of that for us and having copies of the general plan. Would that be too much, or on disk or whatever?
At this moment in time, we do not actually maintain a full printed copy of the general plan. It is all available online at the department's webpage. It can be printed out. I think to print it out in color is a full copy. To print all that out in color is several $100s for each copy. So, well, I would suggest that you need it in color because you can't read the maps. Because when they're in black and white, they just don't work. So we are maybe trying to be a little more sustainable by going to a paperless system, and it does have some consequences. We'll see what we can do to get a copy.
Okay, or maybe color the copies that are online.
I will tell you right now, we don't have a single copy of a full general plan at this moment in time.
Okay.
I mean, I have actually a copy from 2006, but it's not up to date.
I see.
But we have one left.
Okay. Well, that's what we're here to do, is to provide a general plan going into the future. Okay, thank you. Other public comments? All right, bring it back to the chair. At this point, we're going to move to our current business, item number 4. And I will turn the meeting over for the current business to our co-chair, Jeremy Evans.
All right, how's everybody doing? Good. All right. So first item of business is the joint meeting minutes from February 1st. So recommended action is that GPAC review and approve the minutes from February 1st. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Yes, Dennis Baker moves. Do I have a second? Nancy? All right. All in favor? Oh, excuse me. Let me take comments first. Any comments on the minutes?
Yes, could you approve them with Jim Mosher's comments, corrections?
Which is right below that, right? Or do you have additional
I have
comments?
hard
you want
copy
to make?
next to you.
All right. So, Dennis, would you like to move again to? w- Thank you, Dennis. All right, Nancy, you'll second that? Okay, do we need to do a roll call vote or just a raise of simple hands is okay? And then all in favor, please? Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion passes. Item B, the review of responses received to the general plan update consulting services RFP. And the recommended action is to receive a status update from the city staff on the responses received from proposing firms.
Thank you, Co-Chair Evans. Ben Zadiba, Principal Planner with the city, and I will provide you a very brief status update on our responses received, or rather response received in this case, to our RFP. I want to make sure that, as you saw attached to the agenda, it's a very robust response that was received from a very prominent planning firm that is Dudek. They're actually an engineering firm, but as I understand it, they have a boutique urban planning and design services division that is in-house. And I believe, based on cursory review, that they've provided a very comprehensive response to our RFP. So we want to just provide a status update that we did receive one response. I think that although we would have liked to have seen more responses, it's a tough time for that type of service right now. And we've heard from a lot of people in the development industry that it's very challenging to get consultants on board at this time because they have a lot of work to do. And the comprehensive update to our general plan is no easy task, as you know. So this is something that's going to be very time intensive, and a lot of firms don't have the bandwidth right now to take this sort of a project on. So we're actually very pleased with the response that was received, and we hope that you all see that they put a lot of effort into responding to all the city's required tasks. But we definitely look forward to hearing any feedback that the advisory committee has. As noted in the public comments received from committee member Moser, the recommended action is not to necessarily recommend anything on this, as the steering committee has the purpose of recommending a consultant to the council, and that's not something that is in the advisory committee's purpose and responsibilities. However, again, we'd look forward to hearing any comments you have at this time.
Thank you, Ben, for that update. I'll provide a couple of other items here. The way that we review these proposals, first of all, you don't see a cost proposal with this. The first thing we have to do is we have to determine if the proposer is qualified. And so there's an in-house team of staff consisting of Ben Zadiba, myself, and Jaime Murillo. We're going to be going through to make sure they're technically qualified to, and they've responded to what each of the items in the RFP are. We haven't done that. We will hope to conclude that next week. Obviously, we're not going to be comparing with other proposals. We only have one proposal. Just given it a cursory review that we have so far, it appears that they've addressed each of the various topics. And we've also looked at some of their projects that they've worked on. It does feel that it does appear initially that they appear qualified, and they've done similar projects in similar settings. And so that's a good sign. They are teaming up with Kearns and West to do the outreach as well, and many of you may remember them. They did the outreach effort for the Listen and Learn that kind of led to the housing element update. So, again, that kind of technical evaluation of what's in the proposal is there, but when you look to it, you'll read the various different tasks and the various different elements in there. We believe that it covers everything that we've asked them to do. That doesn't mean that it can't expand to include other items that the city would like them to do. So if we do end up coming in and doing a sustainability element, once we receive the go-ahead to do so with the city council, we can add that to the overall scope. So the scope is not, set in stone, if you will, at this moment in time. And once we deem the consultant team qualified, we will be allowed to open up the cost proposal to see what all this might cost. I do expect it to be probably $2 million or thereabouts. It may be more or less than that. So again, we don't have that at this moment in time. So if anyone has any thoughts, at least my thought is, to solicit any comments that we may have based on what we see here today, and that would be welcome.
Yeah, Dennis Baker. I want to echo Jim Moser's comment regarding, and I'll just read the first couple. I do not think the outreach provided by Kearns and West in 2019 is the way the paragraph starts. That was in his comments that were provided to all of you. And I actually agree with him. I was not impressed at all with the work of Kearns and West. I have historically been involved in other organizations that have used DUDEC, and I have no qualms about them. I think they've been around for a long time. They're probably a very capable firm for doing the job, but the reference to them depending on Kearns and West gave me pause, and I don't know how you carve that out or you change it or you put pressure on them, and I'm certainly not more capable of doing what Kearns and West did, but I don't think that they were very innovative, and I don't think they were very comprehensive in their outreach based upon many of the meetings that I did attend and others have attended and commented on.
Thank you, Dennis. Anybody else? Comments? Nancy, please.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. My question is, when this RFP went out, this proposal addresses the number of hours for certain tasks? That was not given to them in the RFP, correct? They came up with those estimates themselves in this proposal. And then what happens if they go over those? Is there some kind of who's going to track that? That's the question. And then my comment is, I'm going to echo Dennis. I attended all of those initial meetings for the housing element update, and I thought that Kearns and West was very disorganized. The website was not at all up to date most of the time. We had lots of problems with it. So if there is a way to ask DUDEC to provide an alternate subcontractor for that part of it, I don't know, but I just wasn't impressed either. Thank you.
Could I
Nancy
say something
Scarborough.
on that? Just respond to that, since we will be addressing that this evening. I think that what we can do is make more suggestions, more concrete suggestions to them and help them along the way. I have to echo staff that talking to some people I know who are doing developments, they just can't. The consultants just aren't there. So it's not like we can just say, oh, well, we don't want them, we want somebody else. But I think this evening as we talk, are they going to be here this evening? No? Okay. Well, we'll make a list of things. I think that we can contribute ideas that will help them. I've already thought of a couple of things that I'd like to see just to make it more extensive and responsive.
Debbie, did you have a comment first?
Hello? My name is Dennis Lavange. I'm also part of the Newport Beach Fire Department, Fire Safe Council. One of the things I wanted to ask is, has the fire department, or Newport Beach City Fire Department, reviewed the credentials of the two urban foresters that were included in DUDEC's resume? And if not, it would be appreciated by the Fire Safe Council, which is a group of about 8 or 9 citizens, along with the fire department, and our fire chief, and perhaps our fire marshal, interim fire marshal James Gillespie, has a chance to review the credentials of these two gentlemen, Mr. Allen and Mr. Hufford, listed in the DUDEC proposal, to see if they're a fit for Newport Coast and Newport City.
Is the mic on down there? For the sake of the minutes.
Thanks, Dennis. Debbie?
So just a comment. I actually like Kearns and West when they did the housing element. I don't think it was Kearns and West's fault on the number of people that came out. There was a lot of outreach that was done, both from the committee itself, as well as from Kearns and West, as well as from the city. And the fact that we didn't get, I agree we didn't get a whole lot of people out, but I mean, I think it's just a number of issues, including things that, like COVID, that started to come up and about as well. So I don't think you can blame that on Kearns and West. The website I agree with, but some of that, there's different websites and some of them were updated and some of them weren't. So I feel very differently about Kearns and West, and I actually think they had a very good presence when they presented things to the public. So, but Jim, is the RFP comment period over, or are we done with the receiving proposals? To me, it's sad that there's one proposal.
Yes, the time period within which to receive proposals is passed, so we're not soliciting additional proposals at this time, unless we deemed DUDEC not qualified, and then we would go back out and do it all over again and see what we would get. Depending upon what time of year that went out, we might not get any proposals. We have also seen it's really hard to get good consultants to take on a multi-year project like this. Sometimes it's difficult even to get good consultants to take on even a simple, environmental review for a project right now. They are busy, and anyway, it's just a challenging aspect of this. A couple of things, we could definitely have the fire department take a look at the credentials of the gentlemen who were referenced here for those technical studies. I think that's a very good idea. Thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you.
And in response to the comment about the Kearns and West, one of the deliverables that DUDEC would be coming forward with, obviously with the help of Kearns and West, is a community outreach and engagement plan. And I think that's where we need to spend a fair amount of time to make sure we see all the necessary steps and techniques and tools that we're using to try to outreach the community. And then we follow through on making sure that those get implemented. I do feel that this town is far more busy with their daily lives at times to come out to meetings, and so as I like to say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink sometimes. And I think we'll have to, obviously, regardless of what the strategy is, we'll obviously have to double down and make sure it has all the components in it that we need to have, and then we'll have to make sure Kearns and West and others follow through. And I think part of this also can be an aspect that the committee can help us with, is to get the word out into the community as well. And so there's other things that we can do. You had a question about costs. The detailed proposal, the part of the proposal that we don't have is the cost proposal. What do each one of these components actually take? A project like this, I will tell you that even if we tried to do a not-to-exceed cost of $2 million, my guess is we're going to run over that, and I'll tell you why. Because there may be additional back and forth with the committee and the public and more meetings than we actually anticipated. And there may be a significant more dialogue than what they budgeted for. And so I can anticipate that, and if the committee and the council want more work, it's called scope creep, and it happens quite often in a project like this. So oftentimes, a not-to-exceed amount, for legitimate reasons, we may have to go back to council and ask for more money. Right now I don't know what the full cost of this will be, but you can kind of anticipate that, and we do keep track of all those emails, of all of those invoices, and we see every month, what time is being spent on what task. And they have to correlate, obviously, with meetings and presentations and deliverables that come forward. And so we review all those invoices. And quite honestly, if the GPAC wants to review those invoices with us, they're public records, and they're more than welcome to keep us all on track for costs. Okay?
Thanks, Jim.
Yes. I'm just looking at under budget tracker on page 13. So then if we are in the middle of a project and one of the elements, if they were to need to go over, would they contact you, Jim, and ask for more time so that we could move forward to the meeting with information that would need to be presented?
Yes, absolutely. If there is an issue where there is insufficient funds for a particular task for whatever reason, we've solicited more time than what they budgeted for. Typically, they will let us know about that, and there may be cost savings in another task that might be reallocated. Maybe we spent 100 hours on one task, but we only spent 50, but they budgeted 100, and so those 50 hours are available in the contract to do other tasks. So that's a very common practice in going forward with one of these proposals. But obviously, if there's something that wasn't even in the scope that we've asked them to add, there's a process to amend the project scope and amend the costs. And given the size of this, that'll be a visit back to the City Council for a contract amendment.
Thanks, Jim. Any other questions? Jim, please.
Thank you, Co-Chair Evans. With regard to there being only a single proposal, which we've heard disappointment about, the city's bidding website does show 22 prime contractors who showed enough interest to at least download the RFP, and many more subcontractors who showed interest in it. So it might be helpful for you to clarify to us, did the city encourage any of those 22, including Dudek, to submit a proposal? Did we actively encourage them to do that?
In terms of actively encouraging, I would say no, but we did send them directly to several of the more prominent planning firms listed on that prospective bidder list. So they received it directly, whereas others may have just found it by being registered on Planet Bids as a service provider in that arena. So it was submitted directly to firms, and the larger firms were contacted by phone, but we can't control at the end of the day the bandwidth of these firms and what they submit.
Okay. And the bidding website also indicates there was a question and answer period, and some firms did ask questions for clarification. Could you tell us how many asked for clarification of the RFP?
So we did hold an optional Zoom meeting, which we thought would be a helpful way to, provide real-time clarification on some of the questions that the proposers may have. By our count, we had 4 firms on that Zoom meeting. Dudek showed a large presence with about 5 or 6 attendees, and there were 3 other attendees from individual firms, including Michael Baker, a larger firm, and 2 others that I was unable to identify who they were with. But there were 4 different firms on that call. Ultimately, we did get the one proposal from Dudek.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead.
I have another two more questions that are unrelated to that. We already have another consultant, Kimley Horn, who is working, it appears, on we know they're working on the land use element, the circulation element, and it now appears they're also working on the noise element. This consultant, who is doing the outreach and facilitation for us, the GPAC, is not asked to do outreach on any of those. So how do you see that working? We're not going to have any, who is going to be supporting us on the noise element that I volunteered for?
Well, this consultant will be assisting, the consultant who will be assisting us on that element. Again, back to kind of what we had talked about in some of the earlier meetings. We've kind of broken this down into 2 different phases here. As you may all recall, we've got a certified housing element, and we're in the process now of developing amendments to the land use element and overlay zones to implement the housing element. Think of it this way, that we're making the zoning code and the land use element consistent with the recently adopted housing element. Now, that effort is being managed by Kimley Horn, and this consultant is really not going to be working on that effort overtly. The outreach for that effort is going to be through this committee process. You remember at our previous meeting, we've indicated that we're going to be bringing forward to this body revisions to those policies, again, to implement the housing element. We're going to be bringing forward those zoning overlays so you can see how those would be implemented. We're also going to be bringing forward the objective design standards that need to be put into place. So the outreach effort that we anticipate now for that effort is within this body. we had not envisioned a larger effort. And the reason being is the schedule for that effort. And I do want to talk about that a little bit later. I don't want to get into that topic right now, but so you're right. We do have a separation between the effort to amend the housing element and the land use element, than the rest of the housing, rest of the general plan update.
Yeah, but this consultant is facilitating and holding community meetings. The general plan is presumably not the result of 30 people. It's the result of the whole community, we're hoping. So at those community meetings, do they understand that they're going to be getting input on those other elements?
Well, at the end of the day, it really depends upon the schedule and whether these two projects overlap. Based upon the schedule to get the land use element to the vote of the electorate in March of 2024, we needed to move a lot more faster than the overall update of all the elements. So we had not envisioned an overlap of these two projects where we would be doing extensive outreach. I had hoped to be bringing to this body this month those draft policies. And obviously, we don't even have the consultant on board to do that outreach. What I can share with the committee right at this moment in time is that staff has decided to not have the vote of the electorate on March 5th of 2024. We're going to reschedule that to November of 2024. So that does give us about 6 more months. And so that will allow us to provide an opportunity for more engagement on the policies to implement the housing element. We feel that that's actually a pretty important item here because we were feeling the pressure of getting it done very rapidly and providing additional outreach to the community and having more engagement with that process beyond just the committee meetings. I think it's a very good suggestion. And hence one of the reasons why we've chosen to reschedule and have that vote in November rather than March. So I know that's news to everyone here today, but I think that does play into the discussion that we're having here as to how will this outreach occur? Can we use this consultant to assist us in the existing effort that's being managed by Kimley Horn? I think those possibilities do exist now that we have probably about 6 more months of time to kind of work on the policies. So, right now this proposal doesn't reflect doing that. And I think that we can refine this if we do deem DUDEC to be qualified. And my initial thought is that they probably are. I think that we can refine the proposal to incorporate more outreach in that regard. So hopefully that helps.
And then my final question is that this consultant optionally offered to help the city with the CEQA clearance, as they called it, which they thought all they needed to do was make an addendum to the 2006 environmental impact report. But perhaps unknown to them, I think our other contractor, Kimley Horn, has a task of doing the environmental impact report, which I think they promised to have completed 2 years ago, but apparently have not quite done that because I'm not sure there's even been a notice of preparation. So could you clarify for this committee what the schedule is? Is there going to be an environmental impact report? And when is that going to happen, and which consultant is going to be handling that?
Sure. So as we know, we're working with Kimley Horn right now to implement the housing element. So there is an EIR that's being prepared. Let's just say we're getting ready to issue a notice of preparation of that EIR. Obviously, some of the groundwork is being laid right now to do that EIR. And that, again, is just the housing units that are being added to the general plan by the housing element. It doesn't incorporate any other changes to the general plan. And so when you think about what the comprehensive update of all of the general plan beyond just that housing element component, we are going to be looking at the land use element for other reasons. We might choose to look at the land use element to modify policies in Corona Del Mar. It's really up to what the community might want to see, right? And we may need an EIR for a supplemental EIR or a subsequent EIR for the changes to the entire general plan that might come after the EIR for the housing element implementation. So again, we've got to review to see if this is all technically correct, because I don't think an addendum to the 2006 EIR is the right approach. They may end up doing an addendum to the 2023 EIR that we're preparing right now, again, for that housing element implementation. It may be actually an EIR in and of itself. And so, those decisions haven't been made because we don't actually know the full scope of what the general plan update's going to be, aside from updating policies. We all know that. But are we going to be looking at the land use element for other reasons, including additional development intensity to support all the housing that may be coming forward? I don't know the answer to that question, so I can't answer whether we must do an EIR for the comprehensive update. But typically, that's EIRs are done for it. So, I think, the scope, we might want to modify the scope to be flexible to do either. We might ask them to do an EIR, but we might end up doing something short of that, if it's warranted. So, again, there's a lot of work to be done on the scope, but obviously you've got an indication of their approach right now. Thank you for those comments.
Thanks, Jim. Paul?
Yeah, real quick. I'd be inclined to go along with Debbie's suggestion that we strongly consider Kearns and West. There are a lot of people around this table that attended all of the 7 district, meetings, the visits we had in each of the districts, and then there was a Saturday Newport Together event, if I recall correctly. Not a whole lot of people showed up, but I think it's closer to B+ than it is to B, and I think they're all right. I like Nancy's suggestion of riding herd on them, and telling them, here's the path forward, and please consider our specific suggestions. But I think Kearns and West is probably an okay sub.
Thanks, Paul. Any further comments? None? Do we need to accept the report on that, or no, we can just move on? Okay. All right. The third item is item C under current business. We're looking at consideration of formally requesting council's support for a sustainability and resiliency element. It's in attachment 3 of the packet. At the February 28, 2023 meeting, the city council meeting, the bi-monthly report from the GPUSC was pulled from the consent calendar for discussion. Some members of the city council did not express support for adding additional elements. So the recommended action for us today is to discuss and consider reaffirming the recommendation, including the new element to the GPUSC. Any comments? Yes, please, Dennis.
Do you want a motion to get it on for discussion? I assume it'll require a motion? No, I mean, I could move it, get a second, and then we could discuss it. Okay, then I will, yeah.
Thank you, Dennis, for allowing me to speak before we do the motion, we will go any direction the committee wants to go. I just want to kind of give you my perspective on what happened, and maybe Nancy might have some perspective as well. The structure of the committee, obviously the GPAC reports to the steering committee reports bi-monthly to the city council. And in that standard report, we indicated that we were thinking about doing a sustainability element, so it wasn't necessarily a formal motion and action, if you will. Obviously it was pulled from the consent calendar, and several council members commented on that, and it appeared there wasn't at least support by several council members. There really wasn't a consensus. There was no action item, and so that's sort of where we're at. And so from my perspective, I think what we did is we sent up that suggestion to the council without giving it enough. There really wasn't a good outline as to what it is. And so my thought is, what I did is I just put myself in the council member's shoes, and I haven't spoken to any of the council members about this, but, just looking at a sustainability element, the question is, well, what is it? What's in it? And I think it would be helpful for the council if we provided an outline of what's in it. And maybe discuss that here, maybe get the consultant on board to maybe walk us through what is the state of the art in general plans. I recognize there are some voices on the community that want to push this forward, and that's great. But my thought is when we go to council is outline what it is we're asking them to endorse, because otherwise they don't know what they're endorsing, and I don't think that they want to just give us a blank check as to where this should go. I do think the council is generally supportive of these ideals, but I think they want to know a little bit more about it before we go too far. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg kind of a thing. And so maybe if we slow down and really discuss and think about what are the most critical factors in whatever that element might be, what are those components? And then, you know, put a better outline forward. I think that might help. That's my suggestion.
Can I reply to that? Okay, so I don't want to get in a push and shove with the council. That, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, so, right, so I mean, all I was doing is saying that if we needed a motion to move forward, then we'd make the motion. But as I said, I don't want to get in a fight with it. But I do, my understanding is that part of the charge to the GPAC is to consider the addition of elements if the GPAC thinks they're necessary. And that's what I thought we did. And I don't mind moving forward a little gradually on it, so I'm okay. I don't disagree with your proposal. But I do feel strongly that this committee does have the charge to add elements as we see fit.
I would just echo that. I think like it might be worth stepping aside from thinking about sustainability and resilience for a second and thinking about the general plan in the frame of, you know, if we're really trying to create a vision for the next 15 years, does it make sense to be constrained by the vision that was cast in the early 2000s? And I think, you know, it sounds like to me, and based on the precedent that the last general plan set, you know, there were important elements that were added in the early 2000s. And, you know, it seems to me that the value of an element and adding an element is to create a division as far as where we want to have a subvision within the community and expertise moving forward. You know, I would argue, obviously I argued this before, but, you know, from my perspective, living near the beach and on the harbor, like sustainability and resilience is something that our city will have to have a proactive view on. It as you mentioned, it's going to be, you know, it'll be forced on us by the state, but, you know, we can also take actions into our own hands. There's also, you know, through the Water Quality Coastal Tidelands Committee, spent some time with Scripps recently, and there truly is billions of dollars of funding coming from the Inflation Reduction Act and other parts of the state government, the federal government, and it's going to go to the cities who are the most prepared and have a vision on this. You know, I think we can decide if that will be us or if we're going to kind of move at the pace that we're forced to move here. But, you know, it doesn't have to come from the city of Newport taxpayers. So I would look at this in two different ways. Like, do we have the jurisdiction to add elements? I think we should, because the plan that was created in the early 2000s was a great plan, but, you know, is that going to be durable when we get, you know, 10 years, 15 years from now? I would argue that it won't be and it shouldn't be. And then, you know, as far as other elements that we should look at adding, you know, I think we are tasked as this group is, you know, figuring out what those are. So I'm strongly in favor of, you know, bringing an argument forward to council. And, you know, I'm understanding of the suggestion that we should maybe have a framework proposed, but I would also argue that the framework should come out of the work that we put in as a group. And the framework that we proposed before was a suggestion, but ideally that framework gets refined with the help of consultants. So, you know, as great of a framework as we could put together now, it might not be representative of the ultimate product. And so I would say, you know, we should first and foremost have the ability to think 15 years down the road. And, you know, that could mean suggesting an element that we think is important without knowing exactly what's going to be in it.
Any other comments on that?
Yes. Thinking about that and thinking of your knowledge of it as well, which is very critical to this committee and helpful. We're looking forward to that. I'm just thinking about Mr. Mosher's comments about looking where we've come from, where we are now, and where we're going in the future, and looking at what we're posed with and the changes in the environment relative to all of these different elements. I'm sure you'll find sustainability of interest in many of the elements. So I think that we should make sure that we look where we've come from first see where we are now, and then see where we're going relative to the elements that we have.
Jim, and then Debbie.
Oh, I just wanted to say I agree completely with Kurt, but it is important to understand. I was there at the council meeting, and certainly the mayor pro tem, and it appeared the mayor did not believe that I don't think they'd actually looked at the enabling resolution from last year, but they thought that we were going beyond our scope that they had given us. So we may be needing to request that the steering committee request a clarification from the council or a modification of what our charge, what the scope of what we're supposed to be doing is. More important perhaps than just concentrating on this one element.
Yeah, thank you. I actually think Jim's comment is on track. What are we supposed to be doing here, you know? But first of all, I think, Kurt, we should send you to City Council to make the argument. I think you do a great job, number one. Number two, the argument about funding and financing, to me, would go a long way with this council. And I think, I suspect, and I wasn't at the meeting, but I suspect that was never brought up. So anyway, I think Kurt should go make the argument for us.
Paul, please.
Yeah, just quickly, I think sustainability and resiliency, those are game changers. They are headline elements. Just think vulnerabilities in our city of tsunamis, of climate change, of sea level rise, and maybe many other vulnerabilities. I just think it's a source of funding, according to Kurt, as he's indicated again tonight. And I think we need to make a strong argument and perhaps lobby the council people to let them know that this is kind of important to us.
Thanks, Paul.
All right. So this is obviously a great topic, and we all benefit from sustainability. But as its own element, how would it interact with the other ones? You know, if you go through and we do land use for 3 months, and then sustainability comes in, who would take precedent on something, or noise? Because as I said last time, this touches every single element as far as I can see, just like parking would affect office buildings. And I think that this should be part of our mission statement. It should be a leading factor of Newport Beach, but just have it be its own thing could override pretty much every other element.
What I would respond to, I know Paul was touching upon the vulnerabilities of the community. I think he's thinking sea level rise. I think he's thinking droughts. I think he's thinking all the rain that we've got here, more rain than we've had in quite a bit. All of these things are all part of climate change. That is definitely something that we have to factor into the safety element update. It's actually in this proposal. That will be an outcome. So all of those issues will be touched. But I do think this sustainability, and then I know there's been comments about a climate action plan, touch upon a whole host of other kind of peripheral issues that are related. And so I think what I'm seeing is that clearly we need to maybe organize a general plan possibly in a different way, address the topics of the day that we're bringing up, and I know we're going to be doing most of them, but maybe not everything that everyone's thinking here. So I think, my suggestion would be to kind of slow it down a little bit, sit down and figure out what this is, outline it, create a brief presentation, and then it can be presented to the city council upon a recommendation of the steering committee. And then we go get buy-in from the city council before we spend a lot of time and effort on going down a path that the council might not want to do. So I'm thinking that maybe one of the refinements of the scope of the consultant is to work with us immediately on trying to frame this discussion, put this together with this committee's help. Again, spend some time enough to get some thoughts on paper, get that proposal ready to go, and then present it to council and see where we're at before we spend a lot of time. It's kind of how I might suggest to do it. I'm happy to hear any input from the committee, and obviously we'll be discussing it again with the steering committee in about 15 minutes or so, 10 minutes or so, when we get to that part of the agenda. As to the comment about how all of this kind of works, it's set up to where, you know, yes, this is the body to discuss debates and maybe new initiatives. The recommendation from this body gets forwarded to the steering committee. The purpose of the steering committee is to take those recommendations, and they're the ones who check in with the city council and seek the guidance. Again, they steer us. The steering committee can steer this body into one direction or the other direction. But I think, you know, they've got to report back to the city council on what they're doing. And if they steer us in the wrong direction, well, obviously the council will let us know. And that's the purpose of having those bi-monthly reports back to the city council. I think a whole new element really is to a level that requires council buy-in initially early on. Obviously, you saw what happened. The council said, well, I'm not sure about that. You know, I don't think they said no. But they said, we're not sure about that, and I think partially because they just don't know what all is in that yet. And so my thought is, let's work that out first. I don't, you know, while we may have a sense of urgency here in this wintertime where we have bluffs eroding and houses being demolished and obviously sea level rise is on our minds, you know, I think we have the ability of time to really identify what we need and then get it to the council and convince them of the need to do it. You know, show what the benefits are, and we'll see where it goes. So that's kind of my thought on the topic.
Thoughtfully, and excuse me, steering, Mrs. Gardner.
I've always thought, for example, the safety element's a stupid title. Because when I think of safety, I think of police and fire, and it's so much more than that. And maybe part of it is just rethinking that whole element and making it more of come up with a different title, and that's where we would have, because it does address sea level rise and some of these issues. That's something the committee might consider. Is there a way of, as you said, sort of looking at the elements, and is there a switch there or an expansion of that particular element that might not be a whole other chapter but would incorporate everything we're concerned about?
Thank you. All right. Ruth, please.
Thank you. I think some of us, I'll just speak for me, I think in the vote that we took last time, I think just thinking back, maybe didn't have enough information to affirmatively, so I would just encourage and affirm what you said now. I think we need to understand, if we're going to try to push something forward, what would that actually look like? It may not be exactly precise, but for example, if it were to include things like some of the things that are mandated from our state, we were going to try to have mandated from our city, I'm sure some of us would say that's a no-go. So I think it would be really important to be very deliberate and well-informed when we move forward with things like this. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Any other questions, comments?
I think it also needs to be very clearly understood by all the generations sitting in here and those to come, Curtis, the difference between an environmental element and then creating a new one for sustainability and resilience. It is my understanding and knowledge and education, those are two different beasts. They're two different categories. So I think when people hear sustainability and resilience, they think, oh, that's environmental. Well, it is, but it's a different leg of the environment now that we didn't have to address 20 years ago. So I think that that perhaps would be helpful in people understanding that we're just not adding on a second wheel of one, replicating a second wheel that already has one in the works, that it's a completely different approach to the earth, because they are two different approaches.
Thank you. Yes, please.
If there are any existing cities, counties that have sustainability, resiliency plans that we can look at to see what they're at?
I know when I was kind of looking through the cities that are templates for this, part of this was from our work on the water quality coastal tidelands plan, because along with the Harbor Commission and others, are technically tasked with a lot of the infrastructure projects in the harbor that deal with sea level rise. We did some research on other cities that are out there, and there are like local cities, like you have a Huntington and a Laguna. I wouldn't say they're like leaders in the space, but they have plans. You have like San Mateo, California, and a lot of the cities in the San Francisco Bay have pretty robust plans. But a lot of the leaders in the space are actually conservative cities on the East Coast, which I think is kind of interesting. And they've been partnering with, and when I say conservative, I mean like they have a Republican mayor, which I think might resonate here. Cities like Charleston, Miami, Virginia Beach have really kind of taken the lead. And part of that is because they're more exposed to hurricane risk. But a lot of it is also, they have, harbors that bring a lot of dollars to their cities. So there's some really good templates out there. And we've talked with, through Water Quality Coastal Islands, I've talked with some of those cities like Miami and Charleston, and they have best practices on what they scope into those plans. And it does touch other elements for sure, but they've done a good job of kind of siloing it. And ultimately, they've ended up actually structuring their cities' cost centers around like elements like this, and have been successful at getting federal dollars accordingly. I'm not saying we need to go that far, but there's some great templates out there for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I was also looking at, just before this all started, at general plans of what other big coastal communities in California, and I was dismayed really at the, San Diego's general plan looks very, very old, and other coastal communities as well. So I mean, Newport Beach, we were ahead of the curve already, I think, on a lot of other coastal communities.
If I may, Chair, one thing I want to point out in the DUDEC proposal, they do have a climate resilience and sustainability staff member in their proposal. I don't know if they're looking at that as part of their proposal, but we can definitely augment what they're doing there to kind of help us, and they can go to and find those plans and then bring those forward to the committee so we can examine. Part of what the consultant is going to help us do is to go out there and look and see where those examples are of good practices, the best practices, and try to bring them here, and then we can replicate and adapt them to what we need to do here. So with the interest of time, I know we have one other agenda item, and
Okay. So as far as this particular item goes, did we have some sort of collective support to maybe table this for discussion at the next meeting? And maybe in the meantime, subcommittees sort of research this issue and come back with ideas and suggestions. And then maybe in the interim as well, we get some feedback from the steering committee and from council as where they want us to take this and what sort of authority we have. Can we, and staff? Is that okay? Okay. I don't know if we need a motion for that or not, but if I could get one, I think for the sake of, might be, okay. Okay, all right, wait a second on that? Okay. Yes, tabling it. Okay, all in favor? Raise your hand. Aye. Any, right. Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Okay, we have, next item is item D, subcommittee breakouts. So again, the idea here is just that committees would get together and plan their future meetings, coordinate their meetings. So there's no action items there. And then, do we do that? You want us to do that now? Or for the sake of time?
what I would say is the purpose of this agenda item, if I may, is really to kind of, we've got several staff members here, we've got different diverse groups. What I really want to do is just try to get those subcommittee meetings scheduled. I know we've got a committee meeting on the safety element. We have met on land use. I think safety is actually scheduled for next week, I think. Is that right, Jocelyn? Next Thursday? Okay, that's Jocelyn Perez, our associate planner here. And the thought is really just to try to get those meetings scheduled so we can start. Now, you may ask, why are we having these meetings in advance of having a consultant to assist us? The whole point of having a meeting up front is just to kind of get together, meet, to talk about what the safety, talk about what the various elements are, get educated on that, and then start to get, you know, the thought process going. And then obviously once we get a consultant on board to assist us, then we'll take it to the next step at later meetings. So that was kind of the purpose of this agenda item. So I know it may be a little unwieldy to kind of break up into different groups here, but it's really with an effort to try to schedule those meetings going forward.
Would it be okay, or would it be an issue if they broke out after the meeting, or is that an issue with the whole public meeting issue?
What I would say is that, quite honestly, this is a little awkward no matter what we do, because if we all kind of break around, just kind of huddle here to kind of start throwing dates out there on calendars, I know that staff members had emailed, and I don't think we kind of settled down on what those dates might be. I know I'm going to be kind of chairing the vision committee. Ben's got an idea on how to do this.
Let's try this. Thankful for technology. There's a lot of things like Calendly, for instance, where we can send out multiple dates as options and get a poll going as far as, I know Jocelyn mentioned, and just for the record, since we can't hear on the mic, April 30th at 4 o'clock for the safety element subcommittee. So 4 o'clock may work better for some. Our land use element subcommittee was at 6 o'clock. So we would like to know time of day preference. Again, at the prior meeting, the subcommittee, or the GPAC did say that these will be public meetings, although they're not Brown Act meetings. They are open to members of the public. So we will be placing these meetings on the city calendar, and anyone is welcome to attend. So I would suggest that maybe instead of breaking out as multiple people, or people on multiple committees as well, so it's going to get really confusing. And I think it's going to go longer than we want it to. And I'd like to get you home if you'd like to go home as well. So I do think the liaisons can send out a poll to get some suggestions back from you, if that's all okay. And with that, I would say, please contact us if you don't have your city email set up, because that's where those polls will be coming. I know Safety Element got creative and included your personal emails on the first iteration of the communication. We will do that if it comes down to it, but that's not a regular occurrence, so I'll conclude with that.
And one housekeeping note, if these are because they're non-Brown Act committees, trying to avoid that, we can't have a majority or even 15 members. So I know some of you want to go to, even though you're not an official committee member, you want to go, which is great, but if it's a large committee and your presence tips it over, then you will have to excuse yourself. Just as a reminder, not to be mean to you, but that's just, we don't want to get in trouble with the Brown Act.
All right, well, thank you. So we'll move on to item 5.
Real quick,
Yes, please.
can we take a poll as to the start of this meeting, or is this set for 6 o'clock? Or this meeting's
Set for 6, but I mean, we could we do another poll on that via email? Via email, we could do something via email versus doing it here, I think it'd be better. Yeah, doodle poll or something. Okay, good idea. Charles, thanks.
Ben, you meant to say March 30th, I hope, for the safety.
All right, thanks, Charles. Okay, item 5, thank you, guys. Committee announcements or matters on which members would like to be placed on a future agenda for discussion, action, or report. It's a non-discussion item, but if you guys have any. Yes, Jim, please.
Yeah, I have an announcement, which I would hope would be of interest to everybody on the committee. I put it in writing, so you would have a link to it. But at Tuesday's city council meeting, the council will be receiving and, in theory, reviewing the 2022 annual general plan progress report, which details how our current general plan is going with each of its elements. And I think the link is in writing, but I think if you just put in the city web address /APR for annual progress, well, actually, you won't find it there. So you need to, I don't know, tomorrow night there will be a city council agenda put out. There will be an attachment to that. And then the other comment, I don't know that it's would actually be a topic that we needed to discuss at a future meeting of this body, but following up on Dennis Baker's comment at the very beginning of the value of having printed copies of the general plan, this is actually a fairly recent printed copy without the housing element in it. The current housing element would be bigger than all of this put together. But one thing I notice in the general plan, in the section called related documents, it says that the plan also includes separately bound technical appendices called the technical background reports, which contain background data an analysis pertaining to all of the planned topics. And in the proposal for consultant, they were offering to, or planning to prepare technical reports of their own, but I think it would be very useful for the committee to see those technical reports that are part of the general plan. And those are not currently online, so I'm wondering if the Community Development Department could put those technical background reports online so that we're actually seeing the whole general plan online and not just this part of it.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Looks like Jim just took a note on that too. And I think, yeah, so we'll take care of that.
I have one more comment. In our last minutes, we had noted that we would meet the first Wednesday of each month. Could staff give us an idea? I talked to Liz about that, and she said we should bring it up. Will we be meeting on the 5th then, the first Wednesday in April?
May 3rd.
I think that's
Would
a
May
good
3rd be
idea.
good?
Someone called to my attention that it was Passover that day as well.
I think if we go at May 3rd, the first Wednesday, and we can discuss the time. There was a question about timing. That would be fine at this point in time. I think that will give us enough time to get through the proposal, and we'll have some feedback on where we are with the DUDAC proposal.
Okay. I think that's good. That's a good date. And if we keep it that way, it'd be great because it leaves the rest of the month for committees to meet.
All righty. No further comments. Can I get a motion to adjourn this meeting? No, hey, we don't need a motion, so we're good. We're adjourned.
Are here. And we will begin with public comments on non-agenda items. Are there any comments? I have a bunch of things, just housekeeping things. I would like to be sure that the steering committee is automatically notified of the GPAC meetings. I was aware, but my two fellow members were not aware, so that we can be there. It was very interesting, very educational. I would not have wanted to miss the meeting and the discussion tonight.
Agreed.
So that's one thing. That's nothing. Oh, and then also, once you get subcommittee meetings, let us know, and then we can decide. We will, obviously, only one of us could ever go to a meeting at a time, but then we can decide among ourselves which ones we'll go to, which we did. Any other comments besides mine? Okay. Current business. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes with the additions of Mr. Mosher?
Motion to approve.
All right. Deemed approved. Now we get to our favorite thing. Look, those of you on GPAC, do not resign. It is so difficult to do this the way we do it, the way we're required to do it. And I found this one even more difficult, just because before we had at least quite a few names to fill up. So I have a couple that I will say we're doing 3 tonight, and there's one more.
Yeah, so we actually have 4 vacancies. So I believe you could generate that list with all the recommendations for those vacancies this evening. And then in our future council meeting, I know that it's been brought up by Mr. Mosher that the chairs were not formally recommended to the city council for the for the advisory committee. So we would include that in that same report. So that'll be formally recommended.
Okay, because I had emailed Simone, and from what he said, we had to set out a whole nother thing because it was a different date of that. But yeah, we'll put one with an asterisk or something. So the one thing that I did, and I'm really interested in how yours, I'll let you go first. I just wanted to say the one thing that I did notice, you get to go first, but I've got the mic, that there was one of them that was representing District 5 and we don't have any representatives from District 5. So that, to me, was something significant.
Is that person here?
I don't think so. But anyway, so that was one thing that I noticed. And then I also noticed we're still doing pretty well on our age spread. But anyway, so I'll have to find this thing in my thing. But anybody, you're particularly caught your eye, Kimberly?
Well, I think we all know, Charles was one that I think we all thought, we all thought was already on the GPAC and wasn't, so he was definitely on my list.
And mine as well.
Have no objections to Charles. So, all right, we will make Charles and others.
Well, I'm trying to figure out who you were saying.
Here he is, right here. His name is Harrison Rolfs. He's a young guy, younger, but
he was one of my
was he? I
tops, too,
I
yeah.
just feel like it's important to have these districts represented, and so that was why that really caught my eye on that. That he's, I mean, he's qualified, but that we don't have anybody from District 5.
I would agree with that if Philip does. What is District 5?
Elbow Island,
Oh, Bella.
Irvine Terrace.
Yeah.
I've got it right here.
So will we agree on him?
That wasn't one of my.
Okay, then we'll hold him.
That's fine.
Well, let's put a question mark there. And who did you have, Philip, that was high on your list?
So the other person, the other two I had Susan DeSantis and. Yeah, I'm trying to find the sheet here. Yeah, Matthew Brady.
I had Matthew Brady as well.
Okay, and I had Susan as well, so let me.
Choice of three.
Yeah, hold on. So let's look through, because we can always make sort of that, like, they may have to wait, but if that's our agreement, we would then have 4. Let me look at Matthew Brady. Sorry for this process.
It's a very painful process to do this way.
Thank you. Oh. Yeah, okay. So we have Charles Fancher, we have Matthew Brady, and should we put,
Sorry, I thought he gave you Susan's.
okay, did you see, was Susan on your list?
She was on mine.
She was on your list. She was on all 3 of our lists then.
Susan was not on my
Oh,
list.
she wasn't
but
on your list,
Matthew was
okay.
on my list, and I think on Philip's list.
Okay. So we have 2 and 2 on those. Charles is on there. Then we could make, I just would like to get District 5 in there.
Can we add one?
Well, we can, I don't know if we can do the 4 tonight or not. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's a suggestion, that we have a backup, and then if we can go into the thing, we'll put Mr. Rolfs on the backup.
Okay.
And let him know that, barring a whole bunch of fabulous new people coming and applying, that he would be on it.
Okay.
So do you have that? So it's Charles Fancher, Matthew Brady, Susan DeSantis, and as the infill, that. Great, okay. So then the RFP. And I'm sorry that you missed a lot of the comments. They were really good. Obviously, GPAC is a very sharp group because they really talked a lot about the issues. There was a disappointment that only one was submitted. We had a discussion about why that is, and it's true. It's just tough right now. There's a lot of general plans out there and everything. Philip?
Yeah, I was going to say, Jim's comment in writing, it was surprising to me as well that 22 people registered and we had one. And I'm curious, when we get to that point, does staff do outreach to, and you may have already covered this, I apologize. Does staff do outreach to the other groups that registered to find out why they didn't respond?
So we didn't do outreach to verify why firms didn't respond. When the first RFP went out and we didn't get a single response, we did reach out to a couple firms to understand maybe why they didn't propose on the request. For this one, we did send out individual emails to distribute the RFP to some of the more prominent planning firms that were on that same 22-person list. But ultimately, I guess the other part I should add that we mentioned earlier was that we held a Q&A session over Zoom. We had 4 firms on that, as best we could tell, one being Dudek and one being Michael Baker, so some prominent planning firms. And at the end of the day, we just got the one proposal. We talked a little bit earlier about bandwidth and that this is a multi-year project. It's hard for consultants right now to take something like this on.
Yeah, it is. So I have not worked with Dudek. I know them more as being environmental than complete general plan. The people that are assigned to this, have we reviewed their resumes? Are they sufficient in this RFP?
So part of the process will be, even though we only have one proposal, staff has to create an evaluation panel, and that'll be me, Jim, and one of our other principal planners, Jaime Murillo, and we will be looking at it from a technical qualification standpoint. So the RFP that went out did have 4 different evaluation criteria that we'll have to look at and score. So part of that will be looking at resumes, and each resume includes project experience and making sure that they are qualified to do a comprehensive general plan update. I agree. I didn't know that Dudek had such a planning realm, but the way it was characterized in the proposal is that they have a boutique urban planning and design component to their firm. So it sounds like that's how they differentiate themselves from the overall Dudek program.
Okay, I did see that on their website. It'd be great. I love that you guys are going through that process with them.
But what happens if?
We will be checking the references and calling references on these folks.
What happens if they?
I've worked with several of these staff members,
Yeah.
and you're right that they're really more in environmental, but they're also into coastal engineering, coastal act issues, if you will. We actually have Dudek under contract right now to my department to assist us doing coastal act as a staff augment, and one of the gentlemen here, Matt Vallejo. So I know him. But you're right, we're going to be, when we engage with them directly and start asking questions, we are going to be seeking and looking at resumes and talking to those other cities for projects that are similar to see what their experience was. So yes, we are going to be looking at it.
Awesome, that's great, thank you.
But what happens if you're not comfortable with them? Where do we go from there?
Well, if we're not comfortable with Dudek, that would be, we would have to go back out and do a whole new RFP process. Absolutely.
The other aspect that came up was the community outreach. There, you don't need as much expertise in the value. You know what you want, and there was sort of a split feeling among GPAC members that some felt that what's the group's name? Yeah, Kearns and I want to say Kimberly, and I got the K's mixed up. Kearns and West didn't do much of a job the first time around, and others said, hey, they thought they did a good job. I'm sort of in the middle that I think we're a tough act, frankly. I think we're tough to get people out, and I thought that their first thing at the Civic Center was really pretty surprising. They got a couple hundred people and a lot of young families and everything. But I did feel like there was so much more they could have done. And one of the things I would like to see us do, this is with the city and also with the consultants, a couple things. One is, I want to make it so easy. I mean, you go on the website today and you type in general plan and you get the general plan. You don't get, or you get the general plan update committee, or you get the general plan advisory committee, but you don't just get a, what's it about? I think we should have something there that says the general plan process, and I mean, it just takes you right there into whatever our link is, whether it's going to be the catchy slogan or whatever, but really, really easy. I think that also it would be nice, I know we have notices that go out in other things, that people could sign up and just get notification. This subcommittee is meeting. GPAC is meeting, the steering committee is meeting, and it goes out to them. They don't have to constantly be looking. It makes it easy if we want research. So I think some of these things is what we would like to see, I would like to see at least, in the process of discussing with the outreach aspect of it, because I think we can do much better than we have been, and we have to make it just as easy as possible.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the outreach piece, and I thought we were going to get a list of the companies that we'd reached out to, because I believe the response was that we hadn't received much feedback. Is that still the case, that there were limited options for the outreach piece of people of groups who had actually responded? No, I'm going outreach. But outreach is its own component too. You can do that separately.
They were doing it with as part of this.
No matter what, it has to be the same.
But that was the way it was done. That DUDEC incorporated Kearns to handle the outreach as part of it.
Well, maybe I can help and respond. Typically, when you do a comprehensive general plan update, the main planning firm will either do the outreach component, they'll prepare an outreach plan based on input from the jurisdiction, and then they will execute that. Some firms will partner with a separate sub-consultant, and so we didn't limit how this would be constructed. There are firms that do the outreach on their own, and there are that sub-consultant. So, any of the firms that might have wanted to bid on this could have done it in either fashion. We didn't send out a separate RFP just for outreach. It's just a task within the overall scope of what we need to contract for. So, so there was no direct outreach, if you will, to those kinds of consultants.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I feel like the whole point, we've got a year now, right, to get people educated and buy into essentially the housing element, right?
Well, it's more than just that, and we do have whatever time that we really need to take to get this done and get it done right. And so, there isn't for the overall update of the general plan, there is no timeline for getting this completed. Clearly we want to get this done within a reasonable time frame, because if it takes too long, we're going to lose some interest of the committee, and so and we need to get it done. So typically this can be done in, say, a 2 to 3 year time frame. I expect it to kind of go that route. Now, there is going to be some overlap with this housing element implementation, and I think that we can use this proposal, if you will, and augment the scope to help us with outreach related to that. But as I told the the land use element subcommittee, one of their first tasks is to kind of go through this housing exercise before we start in on other aspects of the land use element. And I also warned them, the housing policy has been established by the council. We have an adopted housing element. We're not going to be going in and reopening that and changing it in ways that won't work. We've in essence promised the state of California we're going to implement that housing element. So, we were going to use the committee structure, the overall GPAC structure, and the steering committee as well, to provide that outreach. But I think that we can do more than that now that we have more time, given the fact that we're going to have the election, the green light vote, Charter Section 423 vote. We're going to do that in November of 2024 rather than March of 2024. That was an announcement I made in the last meeting. So that gives us an additional 6 months to get more feedback from the committee, rather than just having policies drafted and the committee sees them and then plugs their nose and endorses them, because I don't think anyone wants to do it anyway. I get that point, because the amount of housing that's in the housing element is, I think, distasteful to the entire community, even the council. But it's a state mandate. So point of all this, to wrap it up, I think that we can use the outreach to help us with that process too.
That came up earlier in the GPAC meeting, was the concern, and this is, I think, where, again, I think we need more clarification when you talk to Dudek and the group, is that basically because a different group is handling the land use element, that they're really not part of the outreach. Well, to quote Animal Farm, sort of paraphrase it, all elements are created equal, but some elements are more equal than others. And certainly the housing element and the land use element are the ones that most people are most concerned with. And there's where we really need a lot of outreach. So we need to find a way to coordinate, whether it's going to be, whether one group is going to do it all with that, and then give us a plan. Let us see what the plan is for the land use element. Or if this is going to be incorporated into the Dudek thing with their thing, let us see how that is.
So the plan at the moment is to bring forward the policies related to implementing the housing element. Again, these are land use element changes and other element changes, the overlays and a variety of peripheral items. We're going to be bringing that to this committee, and that's really being forwarded, spearheaded by Kimley Horn, the consultant that we have right now. They did the housing element, and they know what's in the housing element. They're the experts on that, and then they're going to be modifying the land use element and other elements to implement the housing element. So that's going to come forward through this process. So, while I do agree that we need to have a lot of outreach, let everyone know what we're doing, we need to be also very cautious that, the city council has established the housing policy for the city through the housing element. And so while I do want additional feedback on how those policies, what they do and how it's done, what they say, we need to be cautious in that we don't want to open this up to the point now where we're in essence second guessing the city council's decision already.
And that was, yeah.
And so again, that's why I stress, the housing policy is set. Now we need to establish how we're going to implement that policy without unraveling the policy. So, I know the land use element is probably more equal than others, Nancy. But again, that initial series of elements, again, we really need to think of it in terms of just making sure the land use element is consistent with the housing element, as opposed to kind of reopening the whole thing.
Granted, but, excuse me just a minute, but if there's going to be a vote and we don't have good community outreach, it's going to go down.
We have to sell it.
Flames.
We have to sell it.
Yeah, so there really does have to be supportive outreach if this is going to float. Because we know that, everybody's reaction is like, we'd prefer not to have it, even if it is a state mandate. So what's the problem? Are you going to come back then to us with more of a plan from both groups, or how do, we can't at this point approve anything because we don't really have the information. You haven't done the total review to give us the green light and everything.
Yeah, we are engaged in looking at the technical aspects of the proposal to make sure it meets all of the minimum qualifications and all the minimum items that are in the RFP. What I'm getting the sense is that there may be additional pieces that we might want them to do. And I think once we get through deeming them qualified, and my initial reaction, this is my opinion, and I've got a committee of staff members to look at this. We do have references to check. We've got to get through the final review. We hope to get through that within the next 2 weeks or so. But my initial thought is that they may indeed be qualified, but I think maybe we want to modify the scope to incorporate a couple of other things, and primarily outreach on the land use element changes that are related to the housing element. Again, to coin a phrase, sell it. But at least to provide the community with the information so they can make an informed decision when they do get to the ballot box. That's I think, really what we need to do. And I think that's a good, solid addition.
Yeah, and I would actually be curious to know if we could pull that out even, if there was a specific group that might be specifically suited to, it's really not a feedback, right? It's this is what's happening, we're educating the community. This has to happen because this is what will happen if we don't pass this element, right? It's completely different than all of the other pieces where we're saying we want your feedback, we want to know what you want. We're saying, we need you to buy into this because we believe the consequences of not buying into this are worse. And that's a whole different kind of skill set than, I think, just a normal community outreach.
It is, and we did actually do a fair amount of that. I remember Mr. Zadiba was giving those presentations during the Listen and Learn, which was actually also facilitated by Kearns and West, and so they're also familiar with the housing element, because when we initially started the general plan update, we kind of refocused on housing, and so we had Kimley Horn and Kearns and West to do the outreach early on in this. So it's an interesting series of events that now they're coming back to try to assist us further, and they already are familiar with our project, which actually helps us examine their qualifications. And while I appreciate everyone's comments on maybe the lack of feedback that we got from the community with the efforts that were made, I think we can double down on those efforts, make sure we have a good community outreach plan, and then make sure it's executed. But having familiarity with the community and familiarity with the housing element actually helps. In my mind, I might actually, it's great. Kearns and West hire, if I was comparing it with other firms, a firm that has done work in our community and knows this community, really does rate a little bit higher because they're familiar. I don't have to educate them on how this community works, so they already know. So anyway, that's just food for thought on that.
All right. Public comment? Yes, uh-huh.
Yeah,
Would help.
for the record, thank you.
I think it's on, yes. What if it does go to vote in November of 2024? Oh, sorry, I'm on land use, and we're talking about the housing element and having to pass what the state is requiring of us. I understand all of that. What happens if it doesn't pass in November, but yet we need to go to the state, if I'm correct, Jim, if I'm not, correct me please, in February of 2025 with our plan? We don't have a plan if the voters vote it down. And I think in the general, whatever that word is, I live on the peninsula, and like you said, everyone's like, ooh, no, not in my backyard. We are going to have to sell this to them. I will tell you, there are so many misnomers out there that land's being taken by eminent domain. I've explained to him that it has not. I have explained, yeah, but you shake your head. Live in Newport for 3 decades. That's all I've lived here for, and trust me, it runs like wildfire. The other one is that we'll have Section 8 housing in Newport Beach. I've been told by Will O'Neill that that is not the case. I asked Will O'Neill if he could give me a clear and concise explanation of how, once some housing is built, who gets to apply and live there. He said, I'll try, but it's not real clear and concise. And I think that if we're going to tell the citizens of Newport Beach that this is a good thing that we're doing, not just because we're obeying the state's mandate, but that we are doing a good thing and that we're doing it better than any other city, then they need to understand who's coming in and filling those units. Is it their college graduate kids that don't make 6 figures yet and need to have moderate income housing? Is it their elderly parents who can no longer keep up their home on the ocean front and they sell it, but yet, the tax man takes it? There's so many scenarios, and I think people would like to know who's moving in here that we're going to let go of the back 9 of the golf course. Oh, by the way, everyone I've talked to doesn't understand that what you guys have done is said, okay, back 9 of the golf course, would you like to be rezoned for multifamily? And the guy said, yeah. Everybody else that I've talked to thinks that the city's just going in and going, okay, we're going to make that multi-housing, that multi-housing, that. They don't understand there's even been a discussion with the landowner to have it rezoned. So there's so much, there's no information out there, that there's becoming a lot of misinformation, and it's just spreading like wildfire. So you guys have got to figure out how we're going to clearly explain this to the citizens and how it's going to sell to them in November, or quite frankly, I think we're kind of screwed.
it's harder today than it's ever been, because all it takes is some posting on Nextdoor or something, and all of a sudden it's, oh, the sky is definitely falling. But it's a challenge, something we need to work on. Jim, you had something?
Yeah, slightly off topic, but to follow up on that, I thought the rationale for, we'd been told, the GPAC, that the need for the land use element to go on the March ballot was because the deadline was not for that, but the deadline was that we had to complete the changes to the zoning, which come after the general plan has been approved. And if it was only possible to update the zoning with a March election, how is it possible waiting 9 months to do that?
Well, there's a lot in both of those two comments. I'll try my best. Yes, we were initially looking at March as the election. What we found is that we really just don't have enough time to edit and amend and update the land use element for these housing units that are identified in the housing element already, and to create the zones for all this and the objective development standards for the higher density housing. We just didn't have enough time to get it done. I'd have to have had it to the GPAC committee already in order to make this work. We just don't have enough time, and it felt uncomfortable to move that rapidly. And we want to spend more time to get it right, because we feel it's important to do so. So moving it to November of 2024 is perfectly consistent with the housing element. And you're correct in that we have 3 years to get it done, which is February of 2025. So having the election in November of 2024 is still consistent with the overall promise in the housing element to provide the zoning overlays within 36 months. You'll also find in the housing element, we've got a schedule in there suggesting that we're going to go in March. Well, we're changing that, we're modifying that, but we're still within the 3-year time frame. The overlays are going to come with the land use element, and they would be adopted, and they would actually be dormant until the electorate has an affirmative vote. So you know, if the election is favorable in November of 2024, then the overlays would be in place, and we would have implemented that aspect of the housing element, and we'd still remain a certified housing element consistent with state law. So the question is, what happens if it doesn't happen? That's a really good question, and I actually don't know. We like to tell everyone that we're in uncharted waters. We truly are. We don't know. We will have, at that point in time, not delivered on the promise of the housing element. I would suspect, and I'm speculating here, that the state will move to decertify our housing element almost immediately. Why? Because they like the builder's remedy. I don't know if you've been reading about the builder's remedy, and this is where you don't have a certified housing element, then builders can come in and start building on the housing opportunity sites right now. So having a certified housing element allows us the time to plan for this a little more thoughtfully, and that's what we're going to be using. We're going to be using all 3 years, if you will, to plan this as thoughtfully as we can. And we are implementing the charter. The council is keenly interested in making sure that we go through that process, because it's important. Now, if the vote fails, what happens? Well, if you read the housing element, it suggests that we'll tweak the plan and try again. Well, honestly, I don't think that's a good idea, because I don't think we could tweak it in any way that would make it more palatable if it's a failed election. And there's also, in essence, conferring with the Attorney General's office. How do we comply with state law when the electorate doesn't allow us that? So what happens? Well, your guess is as good as mine. Are we going to need to get judicial review of this? That may be one path, one course of action. Obviously, if the election passes, you avoid all that, right? If the election fails and we're just in a position where we don't have a certified housing element, how are we going to be compliant with state law? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But at the end of the day, I do believe that state law will prevail over this scenario at some future point in time. How do we get to that point? I don't know. I'm hopeful that the election will pass. If we've done a thoughtful job here, done a sufficient outreach to educate the community, we may educate the community and they may hate the whole concept. Well, that's fine. Everyone has a vote, and they can express that. If it does fail, where are we going to be after it fails? As I like to say, it's uncharted waters, and we're going to have to figure it out as we go along. So that's kind of the spiel that I have for that. Hopefully that answered most of the issues.
Did you have a follow-up, Jim?
Yeah, returning to the agenda topic, which is your recommendation about DUDEC, I wanted to emphasize, I don't know if all of you heard that, I think it was Nancy Scarborough at the GPAC meeting. I want to distinguish on the outreach, there are two aspects to that. One was the in-person meetings and the virtual meetings that didn't have a great turnout, but the other aspect was the website that they set up, which was really pretty dysfunctional, and it did not attract a lot of attention. It was probably even harder to navigate than the city website itself. So that's why I kind of think in presenting their response to the RFP, they thought that, as Mr. Campbell has suggested, would be a positive, that they were continuing with that, not being aware of how dissatisfied some of the public was with that. And so they may not have chosen Kearns and West because they thought they were the best, but they thought that that would give them a leg up with our city staff. So looking at their proposal, they mention other cities that they are working with. Almost all of those are in the past tense, and they often involve other staff at DUDEC. But there is one here that apparently is currently active, the City of Rialto General Plan Update, which is the pretty much identical set of people working on it. And it mentions that they have a comprehensive outreach aiming to engage 10,000 stakeholders representative of the demographics of the community. All sounds great. When I tried to look at the City of Rialto General Plan Update page, it was not very impressive at the moment. But the question, and then they have one other that is in the current tense, San Mateo Harbor District Master Plan, which they also are claiming that they have online survey in person. It might be worth inquiring who they're using as their outreach subcontractor, whether they're doing it themselves for these others, and whether the City of Rialto will become more impressive in the future. What is their comprehensive plan they came up with there? So
Is that it?
that is pretty much it. I, like others, would like to see a different outreach consultant or subcontractor.
Yeah, I would really like, I don't know if this is a motion I can make, but I would like us to pull this out at least and look at some other options, separate and aside from DUDEC, the Kearns and West piece and the public outreach piece.
Comment, Charles?
Yeah, two things. So first, to talk about Jim's comment about 22 people downloading the information and only one bidder. I'm in the contracting business. There are competitors of mine that download everything that comes out. They just have a look at it. It's not indicative if they don't bid. So I don't see the 22 downloads meaningful to the bidders. I'm aware of the marketplace and I know how tight it is. And we didn't get a reply the first time. We got one this time. Regarding Kearns and West, I chose to keep quiet in the last meeting because I thought folks said enough about it. But I've been a part of this since 2019, and the work that Kearns and West did in the past was subpar. And there are people in this room that made great recommendations on other things that could be done that were ignored by them, but we're probably going to be stuck with them. And if we're going to be stuck with them, someone has to be able to direct them to do more. And maybe that's you, maybe that's the council, maybe that's staff, but they are capable of doing more, and we might not have a choice. I agree with Jim. DUDEC probably picked them because they thought it gave them a leg up because they were here before. But I would like to see us agree to hold their feet to the fire at the very least if we can't do anything about changing them as you're suggesting.
Dennis?
Yeah, I want to give two examples, historic examples of institutions that got out in front of controversial things. One of them, and some of you may remember them, one of them was the Orange County Water District when the groundwater replenishment program was going to be put forth. They were following the toilet to tap fiasco in Los Angeles, which went down in flames. So if you remember that and how bad that was, Orange County Water District and the Sanitation District got out in front of it years ahead, and I know that they reached out. They had an extremely good program where they reached out to individual organizations, environmental organizations, Sierra Club, Spawn for a local one, and many other organizations. They got them on board ahead of time. I was one of the people that actually went over to the water district and heard a presentation, or the organization was invited to endorse the project. What that did is it got them in a PR instance way out in front of it, so that the people who were more likely to bring out the pitchforks and oppose it had already signed on and had been convinced to support it. So that's one thing I think you can't start too soon on that. And then the other example was, I believe I remember right, it was Measure 1. Wasn't that the one that took the transportation money and for water quality, I think? M, right, Measure M. And Measure M did the same thing. Same thing, got out in front of it, got organizations, and in our case, what we'd be talking about wouldn't necessarily be like Sierra Club. It would be things like homeowners associations, community groups, Kiwanis. I mean, any of these, all these organizations, if you start now, I mean, like literally tomorrow, starting to get that information out by meeting with them. This is what, to the point of Kearns and West, I didn't see any of that in Kearns and West. Otherwise, Kearns, everything that I saw there, and I may have missed some stuff, but everything I saw there was, you come to us, we're going to do these things, you come to us, and we're going to explain this stuff to you. And I don't think that works. I think you need to take it to the people.
Right. Charles?
Thank you. Member Carter's thrust is that outreach is as important as the work of the sourcing work of the advisory committee and your steering committee. If we can't sell it, all the work that we do is for naught. And I don't want to get into 2 years of something that comes to nothing. And I tell you, I just went through in my community, we went through a process where a small group of people put together a community improvement program of X million dollars to make improvements to our community. They went to the vote, and it was beaten badly, not so much because of the merit of the proposal, but because the voters didn't have ownership of the ideas or the process, and they resented it. And I think it's very important that the steering committee and the conduct of this general plan involve the community in the process, and that's not just the outreach. I'll attempt to brace my comment with some thoughts to put emphasis on it. The outreach group that we will employ isn't just about saying there's going to be the subcommittee of X is going to meet on the 16th at 4 o'clock. The public's invited because nobody's going to come, or maybe 2 people. Jim would be there if he weren't on the committee. But we've got to put the progress and the thoughts of this community, of this committee's work out into the public. And it may be as simple as buying inches in the Daily Pilot, having a budget item where weekly or every 2 weeks there's blurbs on what the safety committee is thinking about, and we start putting it out in the community just so that over the course of 2 years people will kind of think about, hey, I saw that, heard about it, got it. We need to focus on outreach.
May I ask a question? Obviously, we have to go to this public vote. Do we know of any other city in the state that's going through this that has this same issue? And have we researched that? And if we have, are we talking to them? about what they're doing as well in terms of outreach?
Well, we are aware of several communities, and we have been in touch with them. Yorba Linda being one, Encinitas is another. Costa Mesa has their own initiative as well. We're really kind of focusing on what Orange County is doing. We really don't set our sights that much more beyond that. We've got good legal counsel here in the city of Newport Beach, but we do compare notes with those jurisdictions. So. I think Encinitas is probably the one that's gone through a vote and failed, and they're kind of in a unique position here. And so we've learned a lot from them. We actually share the same housing element consultant. And so all of those lessons, and that's Kimley Horn. And we still have them on board as a consultant helping us today. And so we do learn those lessons. We do monitor what's going on in Huntington Beach. We do monitor those lawsuits. And so, we do feel that we are well informed, but, obviously if we need additional technical assistance or legal assistance, we will consult with the city attorney's office and get whatever we need.
The reason I ask is it's going to come back to the ultimate question that was asked tonight. What happens if? And we're going to have to be able to respond. Obviously, I understand it may be a legal opinion, but somebody's going to have a pretty valid answer to that, because that's what this is all going to boil down to.
Yes, I don't know. This you may have already thought of, and that's probably what you were talking about before, but I've just recently gotten involved with our HOAs, and my sister-in-law is part of another HOA, and these types of conversations would be a great thing to bring to them, because I don't know, I hear them talk about this stuff also. So, my suggestion.
No, I think we're very clear that it can't simply be we're going to put something up. We have to do more to get out. But we'll talk about that in a moment. Let's have some comments. Susan, you had something?
Just an observation, and I agree with all of the comments that were made, in particular that the narrative is important. What is it that we are saying? And if we start out every conversation with the state is making us do this, I think it's problematic in getting support. And so the suggestion that we focus on who is the housing going to help, and that, we talk about city employees in the police and the fire who, for lifestyle changes, are leaving the city. Part of that is because they can't find housing, or they can't have family housing that's close to where they're working. And that situation is not going to get better, because all of the communities, or many of the communities in Orange County, have been facing the same issues as we are. So I think the narrative is really important, and getting the community to understand that we're not talking about Section 8 housing. We're talking about family housing and entry-level housing and housing for people in our community that may be our neighbors, or a senior that needs to move, from a larger home.
So one of the things we're hearing is there's the mechanics. And I think that what we've seen right so far is a lot of emphasis on the mechanics from the consultants. Oh, we will have a website. Oh, we will have this or that. When what we're saying tonight is, hey, it's the message. If we don't have the right message, you can have the greatest mechanics in the world, and it's not going to work. So we really have to focus. And is that something, that's almost a marketing thing. I don't know, again, what expertise. So before we go, I just want to ask staff something. What do you want from us tonight, and what's the time frame? Because I know we don't want to hold this up forever as we go back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think since we have one proposal, obviously, as Jim said, we do have to go through the technical evaluation and make sure that they've checked all the boxes and they are qualified. So as Jim said, we will be contacting references, make sure they have done good work. But I think aside from that, we are looking for your feedback on what may be missing from the proposal. We are hearing actually a lot about the outreach. If I may just touch on that a little bit. So I just would note that, having been through the initial iteration of the General Plan Update Steering Committee, we got totally derailed by the housing element effort, and I think that the community outreach and engagement plan, which is one of the deliverables, also got somewhat derailed and waylaid by that effort, in as much as you'll see some of the tasks talk about pop-up events. We didn't get to do any of that. We did a large community launch event here at City Hall, which, as Chair Gardner said, didn't have the huge turnout we were hoping for, but I know I personally talked to some people I've never seen before in my life who had kids who made it out because they heard there was music and made it out because they heard there was stuff to do. So I think that we just didn't get to carry out a plan that we had set forth, or that the steering committee at the time had embraced and thought was a good plan to move forward with. As far as getting the word out, I just want to echo what Chair Gardner said as well. This is a very complex community for outreach. I personally worked on getting mailers into every single utility bill that says, where are we going to put nearly 5,000 units? If that doesn't get a reaction from the community, I don't know what will. So it's very challenging. It's hard, and I do recall, as Jim touched on, making presentations at each of the 7 workshops that we did in the different council districts, and talking about affordable housing is not what you think it is. It's nurses, it's people who work at Hogue. They need housing in West Newport Mesa to walk to work. So we have started that narrative early on, probably earlier than most jurisdictions have. So again, I just want to make sure that the entire task being presented in the proposal is being considered as things that we haven't tried before because we didn't get there.
What I might also add is, the comments that we're getting here today are very, very helpful to us as we go forward, and, we are going to go do a thorough review of all of the folks who are going to be involved. We're going to start checking some references. But the comments are very important because, you're right. We go through the mechanics, and if the message isn't put forward in the right way, and it does go back to the outreach plan, which is largely mechanics, but we can't lose sight of how the message is put out there. Do we frame it properly? Do we use the right terms? I think we need to make sure that the outreach plan actually includes all of those nuances that we need. And so when we open up we look at the tasks, we see how much money they're spending on outreach. Maybe they're not spending enough money on outreach, and maybe the guidance of the committee on exactly how to go about that messaging needs to come from the committee as well. And so, meaning, all of the comments that we're hearing today may help us focus in on making sure that that outreach plan is robust, but also it's sending the right message as opposed to just being the logistics of it. I think that's really important. So all of your comments here today are very helpful in this regard, and it'll help us focus of what the final scope of work will be, because right now we have a proposal. It has all the basic steps in there. When we get the cost proposal, we'll see how much time they're spending on all of these things, and we may go, wow, you know what, that's not enough. We need more of this, or we need less of this, or we need a whole new element. So we'll go through and have an opportunity to massage and augment in areas to make sure that we're doing it the right way. And so, and I appreciate the comments from the prior effort, as being good and also not being good enough. I get that, but I think we have a better opportunity now to make it work. Now, to go through and have an option to maybe cut Kearns and West out from this proposal, I think what we're really talking about in that instance is really rejecting the proposal and going back out. And so I'm not to say that we have to be stuck with what we have, because if we're not satisfied with what we have, then we will go back out. And we'll see, we'll get different results. So, meaning I don't think that there is a way that we can maintain this proposal and just say, well, we like Dudek, but we don't like Kearns and West, so go get another proposal. That's really rejecting the entire proposal as not being adequate or being insufficient in some way.
But I do think that is such a critical part of this proposal, and maybe, again, not really knowing what the options are here. To me, this is a political campaign. It's a PR campaign. that's not necessarily what Kearns and West is used to doing. I mean, we need somebody to help us create the message, to go out and to make sure that they reach the people, not just put the message out there, but how do you get to the people? That's an expertise that's separate and aside from community outreach, in my opinion.
This is almost like a political campaign as opposed to something else. So, pardon?
I don't know, that's what I'm saying. There may be other groups out there that are more accustomed to doing both. And
Or-
that's why I'm concerned that this is missing the most important piece in my mind, which is helping us message and helping us actually reach all of these people, which is not our internal skill set.
So can you, first of all, do you want to come back to us, or is the time that you want something, us to give you sort of a green light tonight?
We're asking for feedback and input, and I think we're getting that. There's
Okay.
really no action item here
Okay.
for you to say yes or no.
All right.
All of these comments are very well put, and I think, I just want to make one comment, if I may. You know, we're using the terms political campaign. We need to be very careful with those terms, because at the end of the day, the city can't engage in campaigning for an
All right,
election.
so
And so,
right, it's like
now what we
the hired
can do-
consultant as
now,
opposed to an
what we
employee.
really- Yeah, what we really can do is use consultants to provide information and educate the community, and we have to be very careful not to be in a political campaign on an
You knew-
election.
okay,
But
misphrased, but you knew what I
it's
meant.
It's an educational campaign, and yes. we
The minutes will
wanna-
show that I misspoke.
But
Jim will show.
But, so I think when you talk to them, obviously, this is an area that we're all very concerned about, and you need to either get confirmation that Kearns and West has really gotten the message that there was not full support for their last effort and that there needs to be more, or the suggestion to Dudek that maybe they need to add a third. Maybe they need to, Kearns and West is one thing, but they need someone else. I don't know, but you need to have those conversations, obviously.
Yeah, I think we do need to have those conversations, you know, send those messages, see where, you know, let them know what we think may need to be augmented. I don't think we can fundamentally change the structure of this, but we can actually augment it. You know, again, this is a proposal meaning this is not the final scope of work. And we will work to refine that to make sure that the committee is satisfied with what's in there. Because it's really important to have that buy-in to make sure that all of the full scope of work includes everything we think it needs to. And then when the deliverables come, the deliverables is a community engagement plan. And we bring forward that plan. And before we execute it, we want to have it, you know, make sure the committee, the GPAC committee and the steering committee see it.
And like it, because if they can't sell it to us.
Exactly. So there's going to be a back and forth between Dudek, you know, again, as I've said earlier, my initial read is that they're qualified. It may not have everything we want in there. We may need to refine things and augment things. But at the end of the day, where was I going with the thought? You know, there's going to be a back and forth on refining and augmenting the proposal to make sure it does everything we need it to. And it's probably going to, you know, if this is a $2 million contract, it might end up being $3 million by the time we're done with it. You know, to make sure that we're all spending enough time doing the important things. And one of the things was, you know, the website wasn't accessible and updated enough. Well, then we need to make sure there's enough time in there to make sure that we have timely updates for every event,
Yeah.
and that it is developed in an easy fashion. And so, you know, we'll look to see what's in there, see if it jives with our priorities.
We don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. We want to be sure that if it takes another chunk of cash, that's cheaper than having a failure in November of '24.
I agree. You know, one of the things, and obviously we haven't been given a blank check by the city council to spend as much money as we need, but the answer is
Well, the steering committee will recommend.
we clearly want to make sure that we achieve the objectives that the community needs. And if it is, you know, $2 million or $2.5 million or $5 million, well, again, we want to make sure whatever's in that proposal can be justified and supported, you know, obviously on its own merits, but by, you know, the involvement and the time we spend in developing that scope of work to make sure it really does meet our needs and objectives. And, you know, not that I want to spend $5 million, but I think planning the next, you know, 30 years of the community, you know, it's definitely worth
Yes.
a sizable investment to make sure we get it done right.
Philip?
May I ask you a question? So you said that you thought we were saying then you would have to scrap it. So I don't know, as a public entity, you've published an RFP. Are you prohibited from going back to them and saying, we like certain parts of this proposal, we don't like others, you need to modify them?
I believe that we do have that ability. You know, this is not a public works contract, so which has a very prescribed set of rules. You know, this is a qualifications-based proposal, and if we don't feel the combination of team here is qualified, then we disqualify them. Typically, that leads to, well, going to another consultant. Well, guess what? We don't have another proposal to go to.
So that's why I would say, my opinion
We may
would
be in a
be-
more unique situation because we only have one proposal, and you know, I mean, if we feel comfortable with Dudek after we go through reviewing the proposal, but maybe we're not as comfortable with Kearns and West, my first thought is, well, let's see if there's a way that we can get comfortable with Kearns and West. But what if we can't at the end of the day? Then we can say, well, maybe that's not the way to go. And can we introduce a new consultant without rejecting the entire proposal? I do need to sit down with our purchasing folks to make sure we're not violating our own rules of procuring services. And so we may have a lot more latitude because we only have one proposal, but I hear that no one's satisfied that we only have one proposal. I wish I had more to compare with. So it's a fairly unique situation here.
Well, I would suggest you do your due diligence on them, you go through it, and then you may have only 1 point with Kearns and West, you may have 3 points, but at least start the process. So I heard you saying maybe you were thinking about just canning it.
Well, that's one option. I don't think we're there yet. We haven't
don't
gone
either.
through the full evaluation of the proposal to say whether that's an option, but obviously that is an option.
I was going to say, as part of our due diligence, I noticed in the proposal, it did say that they'd worked with Kearns and West on 22 other projects. So I'd be curious to know what those were, and we can kind of get a better idea of how they worked together and how successful those efforts were, specifically with that team.
Any other public comments? Nancy?
I have one. In the scope of work for Kearns and West, maybe their scope could include some sort of regular meetings with the 30-person or some subcommittee of our 30-person committee, specifically on outreach and messaging, so that we can keep them on track and make sure we know that they're going in the direction we want them to go and that it's positive. We have a lot of resources on that 30-person committee. We have a lot of connections. We know the homeowners association's names, contacts, phone numbers, email addresses. We have people on Rotary and Exchange and yacht clubs and all kinds of ways to get that message out. So maybe Kearns and West could be involved on a more regular basis with some portion of us. I don't know if it needs to be the whole 30-person, you know, but that might give them some tools to make them more accountable and to also help them do what we want them to do.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You know, you folks in this room and on the entire committee know this community better than they do. You know how to reach out to the community better than they do. And so I do think that the committee, both committees, you know, and staff will help. You know, we know the community pretty well. We know our plans really well, but you live in this community. We don't. I can't afford to. That's just... Anyway, that's another story, but my I'd love to. Trust me, I would love to. But you know, I think you're absolutely right. And when we look at the cost proposal, look at the hours. You know, we do have numbers of meetings in here, and all we need to do is say, well, if we're going to have, you know, maybe meet every 2 weeks on developing that outreach plan, where they're coming in and sitting down with us and going forward and refining it and working with us collaboratively, and they get all those resources. You know, we need to make sure they've got all those meetings listed in there, and so that and that they can make that commitment. You know, they do have other projects. Can they make the commitment that we might like on the schedule we might like? Might be hard, and so we have to obviously negotiate how that works. So, but those are all really good points, Nancy.
Thank you, Chair Nancy. A comment really to Jim. could be helpful as you deal with your prospective consultant. But I look at task 1.5.1, Community Outreach and Engagement Plan. What I scan is an emphasis on workshops, focus groups, social media, and websites. There is no mention of print material, of going to the print, the print media. And that's how Newport talks. And they talk in the print media. And that's how Newport listens. And I can't believe that this consultant is, to my read, tied up with the social media way of life and not cognizant of traditional communication tools. This needs to be part, Jim, of their work.
Charles, 1.5.3, it does talk about brochures and things on this other page. And that's probably our public information officer, isn't it?
Well, that's part of it. Obviously, we'll be working in concert with our public information office. I think we need to kind of step back and look at, obviously there is a community outreach and engagement plan. It might not say everything that we need it to here, but as we develop the plan itself, we need to include those items that are missing. And so right now, this is really a summary of what it will be, and it may not have everything in there, but we will have an opportunity through going through it and to augment this and make sure it has everything in there that we need, because you're right, the list right here may not be enough.
I'm just giving you a talking point, Jim.
I appreciate it. Very much
that
appreciate
maybe
it.
illustrates a point.
Yeah. Any other comments? Okay. You've had feedback galore. Committee announcements. Kimberly, did you want to talk at all about the Land Use Committee? Did you attend the subcommittee?
We don't need to do the sustainability.
Oh, I'm sorry. We don't really have to do anything because they decided to put it on hold for the time being. Yeah, well, I mean, we can approve the fact that they put it on hold.
Well, if I may, Chair Gardner, it might be helpful to discuss, I know you were at that meeting, and the folks in the room who were also there can help me here if I don't, it's late in the evening, so I'm going to try my best to summarize it, but I think I was putting forward the notion that, we may have gone to the council prematurely on that, and we hadn't necessarily defined what it would be. My thought was, again, I'm thinking out loud here to some degree, in that maybe if we hire Dudek or someone to help facilitate the ongoing discussions, maybe there's a task in here that's not here yet, that we identify where we maybe sit down with GPAC and we identify and outline what that element might look like, get it approved at this level, and then bring it to the committee and bring it to the council. So in essence, my recommendation was, and I believe there was a consensus of GPAC, is while they tabled the item, is to slow this down a little bit, spend some time to figure out what it is that we want the council to endorse, and then let the committee chew on that, and then finalize it, bring it to your group for your review, and then would then go to the city council, requesting an action item for their endorsement of whatever's in that product.
So you want us to approve the fact that
Does that
they
sound
want
like
more information?
Does that sound like a good plan? If it does, then I would like to hear.
I'm fine with that. It's okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that GPAC doesn't want to abandon that effort, based upon, one or two council members, reactions. And I think, a more formalized process where we outline it a little bit better and think it through and then bring it to the council, because then the council can make a better and more informed decision. I think you can understand that, being the former mayor and council member, Nancy.
No, I should just think they would say yes. Okay. Yes, Jim?
Yeah, I would agree with Deputy Director Campbell that there was a consensus about that, but although that idea may not have been fully baked when it was presented to the council, the reaction of those council members, which included the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, was a little disconcerting because they thought that was completely outside the scope of what the GPAC committee had been created for. And so, rather than just that single issue, I think there were also a number of comments supporting the idea that you perhaps at some point need to ask the council to give us, the GPAC, clearer direction as to and because the personnel at the council have changed since the initial very narrow sounding resolution was adopted, what the current council thinks this GPAC could do and how much latitude it has to be innovative. The message came back, don't be very creative at all. You are stuck with our current plan.
I don't know if that was actually the message by the council. It was certainly one person's perhaps. But well, I think for us to go with nothing and just say, well, do you want us to be creative is not a good idea strategically, at least. I think that if we follow what we've decided and have something to present and then say, here, this is what GPAC would like to do, and if there's this is within, looking at the initial description of GPAC, we all feel this is within their purview, but if you don't think so, you better tell us now because, they're going to go off and be creative, which we want them to be. So I think we should wait on that myself. What do you think?
Yeah, I would not disagree with that, but I thought it was clear the Mayor Pro Tem actually said what you would be presenting to them was actually a proposal to amend the scope document, because he thought it was not within the scope, and therefore they could not even allow the GPAC to do that without amending the resolution of what the GPAC is supposed to do.
And I think that's a matter of interpretation if you read it. So, Arlene? Do you have something?
I would just suggest again, like we had discussed in the meeting, to define it, refine it, and show them really how it can work, and to their advantage, because of course if it were relative to safety, the City Council wants the community to be safe. They want us to be able to achieve the housing goals. They want us to be able to keep the harbor and bay clean. It's showing them how it can work and then defining it and then working with city planning to refine it maybe. And with those that are more knowledgeable within the committee might be a good idea. I think they just want to be informed. And I agree with you, Nancy. I don't think it was completely shot down. They just said come back with information.
Any other comments? All right. Did you have a report on, did you attend this subcommittee meeting?
Yeah, I attended the first land use meeting. I believe there was one last week that I did not know. You guys didn't have it? Yeah. So no, I don't have a lot to report on that. It was interesting. It was, kind of an education of what the scope was. I think Jim made it very clear, a lot of people keep talking about the housing element, and the housing element is complete. So we're working on all of the things that surround the housing element in the land use element, not housing itself. So, that was the big message takeaway that I got, was kind of trying to redirect everybody to all of the other things that needed to be done in the land use element.
I always felt that the reason that was so popular was because of a misunderstanding of what it was actually going to do. But, all right, any other comments? Thank you all for attending. See you soon.